Hi, everybody. My name is Diego. I am the program manager for file development here at LAMDL, and this video is going to focus on an introductory lecture to disadvantages and how to argue them both on the negative side and the affirmative side. Uh, we're gonna be walking through how disadvantages are constructed, how to answer them, and then also tips that I have as you progress in the later speeches. So. Uh, yeah, look around, see some timestamps for which part you want to focus on. But without further ado, let's get into it. So, what is a disadvantage? Disadvantages are the bread and butter of negative arguments. It's like one of the most offensive arguments you can have on the negative, and it basically just argues that the hypothetical consequences of the plan are more negative than positive. If you prove that as a negative with this disadvantage, the app is cooked. Absent a counterplan, a disadvantage argues that the status quo is a preferable option than passing the plan. All that means is if you run the disadvantage alone paired with case arguments, you're just saying that the app sucks and that you would rather stay where we are than advocate for anything new. If you are running a counterplan with the disadvantage and it carries over into your final speech, then you have a different advocacy than the affirmative. But if you're negative and you're just reading the disadvantage alone, you're just saying that the app sucks a lot and you'd rather do nothing because status quo is good. Elements of a dissad. The first part is uniqueness. What is the status quo and why is it good slash important to not disrupt it? That's all uniqueness stands for on the negative. You are describing what the status quo is right now and why that is potentially a good thing or why it's important to maintain it. There are two words that you might notice inside a dissed file when it comes to uniqueness. The first one is brink. That just means that we're getting really close to the status quo being disrupted and we're on like a delicate balance that we should not disrupt it at all. Because if we do, bad things are going to happen according to the dissad. The second part is threshold. How big of an action is necessary to disrupt the status quo? So if we are more towards the brink of this dissad happening, of the status quo being disrupted, then that means that the threshold to disrupt the status quo is really low. If we're not on the brink that we're smooth sailing, the status quo seems like fairly strong, nothing is really going to shake it, then the threshold's pretty high to trigger this dissed. That means the action does not have to be that high. So let's actually like apply this knowledge to the uniqueness in a dissed file. So the dissed file says uniqueness, China will fill the leadership gap created by U.S. withdrawal, but U.S. commitment to the Arctic crowds out Chinese soft power. So doesn't really tell us what the brink is here. I'm gonna assume that the negative might say that the brink is pretty close. China's trying to fill the leadership gap. It's not saying that China has filled it yet, and so maybe any U.S. action that crowds out Chinese soft power in the Arctic would trigger this disruption. That it will not allow China to fill this leadership gap. So if I'm the negative, I would say that we're pretty close because China's still in the process of filling this gap and therefore the threshold for what counts as U.S. commitment to the Arctic doesn't have to be that high. The threshold is pretty low to like crowd out Chinese soft power, is how I would interpret uniqueness for this specific example. Next part of a dissad in the 1NC is going to be the link argument. So the link argument, it just says that the consequence of the plan results in a net worth problem. A link argument establishes the connection between the action of the plan and the problem it creates in the status quo. So this dissad is focused on Chinese soft power. We need to link that to the affirmative. So just for reference, I'm talking about deep sea mining affirmative that increases deep sea mining in the Arctic. The link here is pretty simple. According to this negative file, it says mining is critical to China's Arctic leadership. So this connects to crowding out Chinese soft power because if the US increases its mining, it's probably going to rub against China's Arctic leadership in the wrong way. All right, internal link. Sometimes this is present inside one NC file, sometimes it's not, but you need to know it just in case. So an internal link argument states why that link is bad for the affirmative. It explains how the app's disruption of the status quo results in a net worth problem and sets up the impact debate. Just think of it as another step. Think of this as saying we're here right now. That's uniqueness. The app causes a shift to this. That's the link this causes that, and then here's why that's bad. Think of it as a step-by-step process. So In this example, we know that mining is the link. That if the United States increases its mining, it would crowd out Chinese soft power. So internal link, Chinese soft power is key to regime legitimacy. Okay, so now I'm starting to get a picture of why crowding out China's soft power might be a bad idea. So if we crowd it out, we know that China's regime legitimacy is going to go down. That just means that its legitimacy as a nation, its vision, its perception as a key nation would probably go down. Now I need to know why that's bad. So the last part of a dishead is the impact. The impact describes the problem that will happen and why it is bad. So example impact, loss of legitimacy results in the invasion of Taiwan. Taiwan invasion causes nuclear war. As a judge, I'm going, that's why I care so much about this loss of China's soft power. I don't want a war to happen. I don't want the app to cause a war. So now I know that there's a coherent story happening here. At least as coherent as it can get with these nuclear war scenarios. But that's another thing. So elements of a disset in the 1C is uniqueness, link, internal link, impact. You have those four, we have a complete disset. If the negative is missing one of those four, the affirmative can use that and create loopholes in the logic of the disset so the affirmative can win the debate. But again, that's for later. For right now, as the negative, these are the four things you need to know about what goes inside a disset in the 1C. Sometimes there is framing cards in a disad, but again, I'm going to stress only sometimes. This only happens if you're going up against an affirmative that does not deal with traditional extinction impact scenarios. So let's say there's an affirmative that tries to focus on marginalized communities or more structural forms of violence. Framing in a disad in the 1C just provides philosophical reasons to prioritize your impact. So for example, many disads try to get to the extinction scenario. And so they might want to prioritize a utilitarian calculus, which just means that saving the most lives is the most ethical form of scenario planning, and extinction impacts everyday forms of violence. This is only strategic against quote unquote soft left affirmatives that try to focus on more structural impacts. Otherwise, like both teams are probably going to have extinction scenarios. You don't need a philosophical reason to prioritize your impact because most of the time affirmative and negative teams both try to get to like the extinction impact scenario. So yeah, just something to know. Okay. Uh, this is some advice I'll offer for 2NC and 1NR DISAD speech organization. The first thing is that you can add new impact and new link scenarios. So usually most of the time in the 1NC, there's only one link established in the DISAD. In the 2NC and the 1NR, they're both considered like constructive speeches since they go back to back. So you can kind of do whatever you want as long as you justify it. So if you want to read new link evidence, you want to read a new link entirely, that's fine. You just have to like justify it or be ready for new 1AR answers. I would start off with an overview, a short summary of the disad. What is the story of the disad? Remind the judge why like the app is a bad idea. What consequence does it cause? Why is that a bad thing? I would do some impact calculus where you're comparing the impact of the disad with the impact of the affirmative, and then line by line. So as soon as you're done doing your overview and your impact calculus, start with line by line. Whatever the 2AC said, you go in that order. If the 2AC started by answering uniqueness, you start off by answering their answers to uniqueness. But I already went over this in a previous video about how to do effective line by line, how to engage in effective line by line. If you are unclear as to what I'm speaking about here, I highly suggest you watch that video first and then come back over here. Okay. Strategic 1NC construction with a disad. I would always say to choose counterplans that are cohesive with your disad. Make sure that if you're reading a disad, you are reading counterplans that either solve the disad, solve the impact of it, or at least avoid the disad. Do not cause it from happening. So if you're saying that the affirmative causes a reduction in Chinese soft power, or if you're saying that the affirmative causes an economy disad where they cause economic decline, you want to make sure your counterplans don't do that, right? You want to make sure you have a good combination going on so that you're set up for success. So, for example, scenario one is the China soft power disad plus unclosed counterplan. This feels safe because the negative in an unclosed counterplan file probably has arguments that say they like increase Chinese soft power or they somehow avoid it. right? Scenario two, the oil disset and the console counterplan for this topic with the JV file set, that's fine. Scenario three, a states counterplan with a federalism disset. So states counterplan, instead of whatever the affirmative is doing through the federal government, have the states do it. Federalism disset just says that the act somehow causes an encroachment of state power through the federal government, like doing whatever it is through the affirmative plan. The states counterplan and the federalism dissent like gel well together. Um, don't read every dissent ever in the one and C. I'm just giving you scenarios. Like you don't have to read like six different dissets and then pair it with six different counterplans. Unless you're really fast, then you can do that. All right. We're gonna switch now to winning dissets on the affirmative, and the different approaches you can take to beat dissets. Okay. I mentioned impact calculus in a previous slide. This is going to be for the affirmative, but for the negative as well. So, general thing you need to know is that impact calculus is comparing the overall risk of your impact. Uh, and that's important because case and dissent debates operate on a sliding scale. What I mean by that is that when you're affirmative and when you're negative on case versus dissent debates, you want to prove that your stuff just is more important to prioritize. We got to calculate how impacts which one comes first and which one should be prioritized. Because let's say we're in a scenario where the judge has agreed that the affirmative has an impact and the negative has one, and both will 100% happen. If you're in that tough spot, you have to prove that your stuff comes first. And there are a couple of ways we can do this. Um, First is magnitude, how many people are affected. So the affirmatives impact for this file set is climate change. The negatives impact is nuclear war. Start thinking to yourself, magnitude wise, which one would affect people more? To be honest, there's no real like definitive true answer here, which is why it's up for debate. Time frame, when would your impact happen? And again, climate change, nuclear war, debate it out. Which one has a faster time frame? Probability, how likely is it to happen, right? Reversibility, can your impact be reversed? Can the effects of a nuclear war be reversed? I don't know. Can the effects of climate change be reversed? Probably not, but we can like mitigate it as much as we can. Um, and then the last part of impact calculus is a turns argument. In this case, since we're on the affirmative side of how to answer this as, the affirmative would say case turns the dissad. This just means that not passing the plan makes the dissad happen inevitably. Not prioritizing climate change makes nuclear war more likely because the more the planet heats up, the more nations are fighting for resources. That increases the chances of conflict happening, which makes nuclear war more likely. That would be an example of the affirmative, like turning a dissent that's about nuclear war. But we could also do it on the flip side as well. Nuclear war can turn climate change, so the dissent can turn case because the effects of a nuclear war is that, extinction doesn't happen immediately. A dust cloud or like the effects of a nuclear war would result in a nuclear winter where like just like so much dust, so much pollution and like chemicals trap like sunlight from being like sunlight from entering into the atmosphere. And so that would result in a nuclear winter where temperatures drastically drop, crops are affected, et cetera, et cetera. So the very first part of the affirmative speech against the dissent must be impact calculus. You want to start off by saying like case outweighs. First is magnitude. Here's why. Here's time. Second is time frame. Third is probability. Fourth is reversibility. And then fifth case turns the dissent. Give your explanation. And then that's your first part. If you notice in the 2AC files, that is how the 2AC speech starts. And then after that, it starts answering the dissent according to each element that the negative has in the 1 and C. All right. So, speaking of the elements of the dissad, the first thing that the affirmative usually does is it answers uniqueness of the dissad. Um, Before I talk about how to answer uniqueness, I want you to know that the affirmative does not need to follow the exact order of the 1 and C. So, whereas the 1 and C will usually have uniqueness, link, internal link, impact, the affirmative can start answering the dissad however they want. We're just going to go over the dissad in the order that it comes in, so it makes more sense. So remember, uniqueness is that the status quo is good and we should keep it the way it is. The affirmative can answer uniqueness through a myriad of ways. The first one is non-unique. The status quo has already happened. So, example, if the negative read an economy dissed and uniqueness was like the economy is stable now, non-unique would just mean economy is going down now. The status quo has already been disrupted. Second way to answer uniqueness is uniqueness overwhelms the link. This just means that the status quo is so stable that it can't be disrupted at all. So let's use the same economy example for right now. The negative reads a disad saying that the economy is gonna like tank and an economic decline is gonna result in a nuclear war if the affirmative plan is passed. Instead of the affirmative responding by saying non-unique economy going down now, we could go in the opposite direction and then also just say uniqueness overwhelms, the economy's too big to fail. Both of these prove that the affirmative does not cause the disad, right? Non-unique means that the disad either happens inevitably or something else is causing the disad's uniqueness to already be disrupted. The plan is not a result of it. The other way, you can go the other way and say that the disad will never happen because uniqueness is so stable. It overwhelms the link. Even if it's true that the affirmative does disrupt or does like link to the disad, uniqueness is like so strong. The status quo is so strong that the disad won't happen at all. Third way to answer uniqueness as the affirmative is through thumpers. So thumpers just means that something is coming that will inevitably cause the disad to happen, regardless if the app is passed or not. So using uh, the China soft power dissad, where the negative argues that the app is going to take away China's soft power. This is an example of a thumper. This one will say that China struggles to maintain its soft power. Challenges with balancing nationalistic interests and global partnerships will result in Chinese soft power on the like causing it to decline. The affirmative is not mentioned anywhere here. It's basically saying that there are alternative causes to uniqueness already being disrupted. All of these are just trying to like take the blame away from the affirmative. Okay. There are two distinct ways on how to answer the link and internal link, and there are offensive ways to answer the link, and there are defensive ways to answer the link. We're going to talk about the offensive ways to answer the link arguments first. The first one is a link turn. The link turn states that when the affirmative plan happens, the problem the dissent presents is avoided or even solved. This is offensive because if you prove that the affirmative either avoids the dissad by enacting the plan or actually solves the dissad, then that's offense. You're basically saying that this is a new advantage for the plan. So example, increasing deep sea mining increases soft power for China through US-China collaboration. That sounds pretty offensive to me. It means that you don't actually cause a decrease in the soft power for China, you actually increase it. So that would solve the dissad. Second, internal link turns. The change that the app makes in the status quo is actually a good thing and avoids the disside. So I believe it's the same example here. Oh, increasing US deep sea mining increases Chinese legitimacy through competition struggles. Don't exactly know what the warrant would be here, but this would be an example of an internal link turn. You'll see that both of them solve the disad, but on a different level, right? The link in the China soft power disad is that deep sea mining is the link, that it decreases soft power. In the link turn, it's basically saying the direct opposite, that your link story is wrong. The internal link for the China soft power disad is that Chinese legitimacy is thrown like off normalcy through deep sea mining. The internal link turn just says that Chinese legitimacy is increased. Both of these link turns are getting at the same idea, but just like on different levels of the dissad. These are offensive arguments, remember, because if the affirmative proves that these arguments are true, these are new advantages that the plan can use, or that the affirmative team can use as a reason to vote affirmative. All right, defensive arguments. First one, link defense. The affirmative may link but does not cross the threshold necessary to trigger the impact. So example, no regime instability or collapse from China, they're resilient. So even if it's true that mining does take away some soft power for China, there's no regime instability. They're resilient, like they'll weather the storm. No link. There's no connection between the app and the dissad. This is the most like immediate, just cut off. There is no connection between the app and the dissad. No link. US and Chinese influence in the Arctic isn't zero sum. That just means that even if the US increases its own presence in the Arctic, Chinese influence does not go down. It's not like, I win and then you lose scenario. It's kind of just like if the US wins or if the US increases, China can still stay the same. No internal link. Even if the app links, there's no connection between that and the impact of the disad. So, for example, it's the same thing as the link defense. Even if the affirmative does cause a decrease in Chinese soft power, there's no regime instability or collapse from China as a result. Why? Because they're resilient. All right, let's talk about how to answer impacts. First way is offensively. You can impact turn the impact. That just means that the negative's impact story is actually the opposite. So example, um, turn Chinese soft power in the Arctic worsens climate change. The negative is trying to say that China's soft power is something we should maintain. If you turn the impact of it, you can make the argument that Chinese soft power is actually really bad to maintain. So you're turning the impact. Or you can impact turn the terminal impact. Terminal impact just means like the end goal of this decide. The end goal of this decide is saying that it's like a Taiwan invasion is bad or that extinction is bad. So instead of saying like turn Chinese soft power is actually really bad, you can also turn the terminal impact, which is Taiwanese invasion. You can say Taiwan invasion is good. It would be limited as opposed to waiting for it to happen later. This rarely happens, and I don't think it's included inside the file set because this is kind of a crazy argument to go for. So I'm just letting you know that it exists. Like there are cards that say that this would be a good idea now, but I'm not really sure you want to be in like a military general mindset right now. Um, Second way to answer impacts is defensively. First way is just say there's no impact. There's actually no impact at all. Like this Chinese soft power disset is just like making things up. So example, no Taiwan war. She is risk averse. President of China is risk averse. Uh, Impact defense. The impact is overstated and not as bad as the negative thinks. So this one, it's like a step below a no impact argument, but it achieves the same purpose, which is to say that the negative's impact is overhyped. If you can prove this, then it makes impact calculus a lot better for the affirmative side because you're minimizing their impact while at the same time bolstering yours. Okay, let's talk about strategy. So I just talked about how there are many different ways you can answer a disad. That does not mean that you should include every single type of response against the disad inside your 2AC speech. That would take a really long time, and it is also potentially not strategic. It could cost you the round. Let's talk about why. Uh, Here are some different strategies you can take in a 2AC disad speech. The most common approach is a link turn. Link turns are always coupled with uniqueness takeouts and link defense. This sets up the affirmative to say that the problem is already happening or excuse me, or is inevitably going to happen in the status quo, but the plan solves and avoids it. So, an example would be non-unique. China's soft power is cooked now, but link turn, the plan increases Chinese legitimacy in the Arctic. It just follows like an AF story where it's like, we're presenting a problem, Chinese soft power is cooked now, but the plan increases Chinese legitimacy in the Arctic. You're basically creating a new advantage with the link turn strategy. You could go for impact turns, right? This is another offensive approach that just say the disset is actually a good thing. And this one is coupled with impact defense against the original scenario. So, for example, this one would say turn a collapse in Chinese soft power is good because they're horrible as climate leaders and would use their soft power to invade Taiwan. And then you might want to make an argument about how the negatives impact scenario for Taiwan is wrong. That like you might want to read impact cards for why Chinese soft power is really bad for climate change, and then you would still want to read impact defense that says no Taiwan war, just in case you're not winning the impact turn fully. There are more defensive approaches, but there are also straight turns. Straight turns just say a strategy where the affirmative has only read offensive arguments and no defense. So, for example, this is a 2AC disset speech that only reads a link turn or impact turn. You cannot read both of these at the same time because a link turn says you solved the disset, an impact turn says that disset is actually a good thing. You cannot say both of those. Those contradict. Okay. Uh, Other approach is defense, defense, defense. Just a bunch of arguments saying that the AF argues that there is zero risk of the disset happening. Another example is the combination strategy, which is just a combination of defense and link turn arguments. Most of the time, this is the best strategy because it gives you two different outs as the affirmative. You can either go for the full-on defense, defense, defense strategy, or you can go for the link turn, we solve the disad approach. Um, the most offensive approach is just impact turning the dishead and saying that the dishead is actually a good thing. But in that case, you usually can't read defense because if you're trying to win that the dishead is a good thing, you don't want to make arguments saying that there's no impact to the dishead at all. Okay. We're switching back to the negative side here. We're going to talk about how to kick disheads. So let's say you're the negative and you do not want to go for the dishead anymore. Maybe you have two disheads inside your 1NC shell and you only want to go for one of them, or you just don't think the dishead is a good approach. You want to go all in on case or some other argument instead. Let's talk about how to kick disheads. Kicking just means making the strategic decision to abandon certain off cases and narrow the debate down to your best arguments. You must explicitly concede a defensive argument in order to properly kick an argument. Conceding offense is terrible because it gives the app a new advantage. So, defense versus offense, let's remember what this is. Again, I posted a link to, or I posted a video that establishes the difference between defense and offensive arguments. If you're confused about this part, go watch the Dr. Mo video. So I'm gonna skip that part. Okay, let's look at this example. This 2AC says against the Chinese soft power disad one non-unique China soft power is cooked. Second, no link, the US does not take it away. Third, link turn, the US boosts China soft power. Four, no impact, Taiwan war does not go nuclear. This is the disad for the 1NC. Okay. Um, take some time to look at this right now and think about if you are the negative and you decide you do not want to go for this China disad, what are some arguments you could concede from the affirmative in order to kick out of this strategically? You want to make sure that the affirmative has zero offensive out on this disad page. Can you concede non-unique China soft power cooked, or would you concede the link turn, the US boosts China soft power? Think about it for a little bit, pause the video if you want, but I'm going to get into the answer right now. All of these arguments in blue are arguments that you should want to kick. So if you as the negative say, I don't want to go for this China disad. I hate this disad. It's a bad strategy. I don't think I'm going to win. You would tell the judge, Judge, we are conceding non-unique that China soft power is cooked. If that's the case, then the disad happens inevitably, or there's no tie to the affirmative. Judge, we're going to concede no link. The US does not take it away. The AF does not link to the disad, therefore they can't get any offense on this page because they never had any connection in the first place. Judge, we're going to concede no impact. Taiwan war does not go nuclear. So that way, even if the affirmative goes for the offensive argument here, which is the link turn, even if the affirmative can prove that the US boosts China's soft power, there's no impact. Taiwan war does not go nuclear. They don't get an advantage off of this. These three arguments in blue are arguments you can concede because if you concede them, it means that the affirmative cannot go for the link turn. Remember, link turns give the affirmative a new advantage. By conceding the blue, you are eliminating the possibility of the affirmative getting anything out of this page. Okay. Uh, quick tip I have for you all when you're affirmative and you are heading into the rebuttals is you want to make sure you are picking and choosing as the affirmative what arguments you are going for. Do not make contradictory arguments such as a link turn and impact turn. You do not want to say that you solved the disad and then at the same time that the disad is actually a good thing. It just doesn't like compute. It doesn't make sense in the judge's head if you're saying we think that we solved the disad, but also the disad is a good thing. Like the impact of the disad is a good thing. It just doesn't make sense. Why would you solve something you think, or why would you solve or avoid something you think is like a good thing? It doesn't make sense. As the affirmative, you want to identify the win condition. So think about what you must win in order to win the debate. Maybe you need to win no link. Maybe you need to win a link turn. Maybe you know that the impact of the diss head is really potent, and so you want to like minimize that by making a bunch of no impact arguments, and then you want to make sure you're winning the impact calculus debate. Uh, What about your opponents? What do the opponents need to do in order to win this debate? Being able to identify the win condition helps to make sure that you are not just like debating on autopilot, but you are also debating for a purpose and you know what you want to do to win the debate. You also want to close doors and create traps. So you want to say to the judge that like even if the negative is winning this argument, we still win because you want to close any available doors your opponent has at the chance of victory and then also create traps as well. You want to tell the judge that like the only way the negative can win is if they go for the link story in the diss side. The only way the negative can win is if they go all in on impact calculus. But you're like, it sounds like you're or telling the judge, here's what the negative must do in order to win, but in reality, you're leading the negative down a trap. Let's say you know for sure that as the affirmative, you have the best impact in the round. You want to tell the judge and you want to try to like create mind games with the negative where you're saying, in order for the negative to win, they must address the impact calculus page. That's going to force them to spend more time on it. It's going to force the judge to like see that on the flow, elevate it to of higher importance, and then you're creating traps because the more time the negative spends on that page, you know that you have the advantageous position in there. You also want to implicate dropped and conceded arguments. We talk about this in rebuttal advice in the rebuttal video we have in the rookie division. So if you want to learn more about that, check out the YouTube channel and the playlist for the rookie division specifically. And then also, we just went over this. Kick arguments that are not strategic for you. If you know that an argument is not working, find a way to get out of it by conceding a defensive argument that you know doesn't really like help you, right? Uh, with that being said, hopefully this helps you in the novice division and in any other division. And yeah, good luck in your future rounds.